Guys, I hate to break it to you, but I didn't like the Batman. I absolutely loved it. What's going on, everyone? James here with another real review for my most anticipated movie of the year. It's either this or Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Guys, we're talking about the Batman today. A huge thank you to Warner Brothers for giving me the chance to watch this early for review. It is directed by Matt Reeves and stars Robert Pattinson, Zoe Kravitz, Paul Dano, and Colin Farrell, among many others. This is a great ensemble cast. It releases in theaters March 4th, so you can check it out. And when you do, guys, go ahead and get loud down below in the comments and let me know what you think of this movie. Now, we're talking all spoiler-free thoughts, so we're going to keep this energy going. But if you want to get into some spoiler discussion down below, go ahead and tag it just to preserve that experience for others. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the big red button below and subscribe to the channel. Tap on that bell and hit the thumbs up button if you do enjoy this review and want to see more just like it, because man, there's just so much to talk about with this movie. Now, if you are unfamiliar, let's dive into the background context for this film just a little bit. This is year 2 Batman, so not the refined Batman and Bruce Wayne that we're used to seeing in many adaptations, but this Bruce Wayne is trying to solve a series of murders by the Riddler, while also trying to discover who he is in the wake of an ever-changing Gotham City. So like Matt Reeves has said before, this isn't really a traditional origin story. However, there are unique nuggets of information that we learn about Bruce Wayne's past in this movie, and he does take some creative liberties with our characters, most notably Selina Kyle. So there are certain twists and turns here that I absolutely loved and thought were pulled off in a great way. So I, of course, am an optimistic person. Y'all know this, but let's start off with the negatives because the list is very short. So the very first negative for me is probably going to be the one concern that many fans have, and that's the runtime. Now, it is a blessing and a curse, and the reason why it does work against this movie just a little bit is because the runtime is just shy of 3 hours, so it gives us a lot of time with characters, which we'll talk about later. However, there are moments where things start to slow down, and I actually felt the runtime towards the middle of the movie. There's a moment between Alfred and Bruce, and I won't say in which setting and context, but it's right at the start of the second act, about an hour and a half, an hour 45 minutes into the movie. I started to feel the runtime just a little bit, but I understood that this is a marathon, not a sprint, so I sort of reframed my perspective and understood that if I'm feeling it now, there's got to be something to pick us right back up, and there was actually, because once the second act, we get through that, guys, there is an amazing third act in store for you. But there's another negative here, and I do think that it has to do with the dialogue. So in the first act, I think that the visuals were speaking more so to me than the actual conversations were. The writing got off to a little bit of a slow start, but I have to admit it smooths out, especially when we do get Zoe Kravitz on screen. She, and we'll talk about this, delivers such a natural performance, and I loved how personable her character was as Catwoman, and I think that once she gets introduced, that's when the movie starts to open up, and then there are different elements at play that actually make for a darn good film. Now, these next 2 points are kind of nitpicking, but I do wish we had quality moments, or more quality moments honestly, between Alfred and Bruce. Their connection here was surprisingly the weakest, especially when you consider the Christopher Nolan Batman movies where Bruce Wayne and Alfred pretty much went hand in hand. They were a great tandem. However, I'm willing to give Matt Reeves here the benefit of the doubt because, again, year 2 Batman, he's still dealing with trying to find himself and also discover how his parents died. So he's still dealing with a ton of internal emotions, and there's moments of angst in this movie where he even tells Alfred at one point, "You're not my father." So there's a strained relationship there, but you can tell that there's foundations there that are going to make for a strong duo, I guess, as we get into what I'm hoping for is a trilogy. And I just have one more thought in this section, and it is, I wish we had more than one scene with Paul Dano and Robert Pattinson speaking with one another. For the majority of the movie, Paul Dano as the Riddler is speaking to Bruce Wayne or the Batman through FaceTime, through means of social media and videos on the news, so he's not always getting direct contact and direct conversation with Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne. However, there's a moment, and I love this moment so much, that made me want more of that, but it comes late in the movie to the point where I knew that we probably weren't going to get any more one-on-one conversation. So I wish we had more than just one scene, but again, I do think that's something that hopefully they'll work on with Batman's villains as we get into the sequel, which has already been confirmed to be in development. Alrighty, y'all, so can I get a virtual drum roll, please? Let's get into the positives here, and I have to tell you, this is a perfect Batman movie. Yes, I had some negatives there, but I think that as a Batman film, This is the most perfect Batman movie that I might have seen. It rivals The Dark Knight. Now, is it better than The Dark Knight? I can't say that just yet, but it's on the same playing field, and it's honestly because this is unlike any other Batman movie we've ever seen. I wanted a detective story for the longest. I wanted to see Batman as the world's greatest detective, but in the past, a lot of these live-action adaptations, whether it be Christian Bale's Batman, Michael Keaton's, or even Ben Affleck's, we got sprinkles of that, but we never dove into that aspect. And I love that director Matt Reeves decided to go full-on detective with this story, and even at times there were comparisons I can draw to previous detective films and whodunits like Zodiac and even Chinatown. So I love the fact that they took this direction because it really lends itself well to a Batman movie. It's dark, gritty, grimy, but really effective, and you do have to pay attention to every single detail. Between the Riddler's ciphers and then you have Jim Gordon trying to solve some of these riddles with these cards that the Batman is getting, it's just incredibly well done. And like I mentioned before, this really isn't an origin story, so it is unlike many of the previous Batman movies, and I love that a lot. We get little bits of information regarding Bruce Wayne's past, but they never really dive into full-on flashback sequences, which is actually pretty impressive because I'd imagine that most studios are pushing for that, but I'm glad that Matt Reeves and his writer here had the opportunity to go ahead and reframe a lot of what we know about Batman, but also keeping us within that purview of Batman is still trying to figure out what happened to his parents, so they balanced a lot of those different elements really well. Alrighty, now let's move on to the look and feel of this film, because there are so many visceral fighting sequences, there's a lot of wonderful direction and writing, but there's a seamless integration of all these characters too within the storyline that never left me feeling too bloated. And what I mean by that is, you know, we've had a lot of superhero films in the past where they introduce a lot of villains and it just doesn't work out too well, but here you have Riddler, Penguin, Carmine Falcone, and it all just works, and that's surprising for me, and I think it has a lot to do with how much time we spent with this film. And even though I saw a little bit of concern with Matt Reeves' decision to go with year 2 of Batman, I thought that it was perfectly executed. I love that Bruce was still working on the Batmobile throughout the movie. His gadgetry failed him from time to time, and it just goes to show you that he's not a perfected Batman. There's even one moment where the Batmobile doesn't even start up properly, and yes, that was a little bit of comic relief in the moment, but it just shows you that Batman is still working on himself as Bruce Wayne and as, well, Batman. So it was just really, really well done, and I love that they went with this approach because it felt incredibly relatable too. But before we leave this section, I do want to talk more specifically about the cinematography by Greg Fraser, because it's just unreal. Between Dune and now the Batman, guys, I don't know what more you want from Greg Fraser, but I'm ready to put him up there with Roger Deakins. It is just insane. Now, is he going to go down as one of the all-time best cinematographers? Of course, he's got more of his career left to go, but currently working today, yeah, he's top tier, dude. Several scenes took my breath away, including the very first time we see the Riddler, Batman, and Catwoman. I like how the film introduces all of these characters too, and the way they frame them. It's nice that we see Catwoman from afar first, and then we get pulled into a more intimate close-up, and then when you first even get introduced to the Riddler, it's almost like a horror film. So the way the cinematography is used here, it frames this movie as a horror movie sometimes. The Riddler just flashes on screen and it is just terrifying, menacing, and then the way they shoot the Batman stepping out of the shadows, the boots stepping on the ground, water rippling before we even see Batman walk on the scene. It is just incredibly well done, and I can't say enough about Greg Fraser's cinematography here, but I can tell you this: I wouldn't be surprised if it gets nominated for an Oscar next year. But let's move on now to the script, because I think the writing here is equally as important. In any Batman movie, I really think that the writing can make or break the film. Outside of the acting and the directing, you have to have a solid story for Batman, and they took some liberties like we talked about creatively, but I think the script here by Peter Craig was actually pretty well written. We just get a different look at Bruce Wayne, which I loved. This isn't a confident Bruce, and it isn't really an efficient Batman in terms of his flaws and his, of course, gadgetry failing him, but I love that he's discovering who he is as a person. And we see that throughout the film, he's either trying to gain the trust of his peers in Gotham City, or he's just trying to get the job done, but it's like he wants both at the same time. He knows he's probably going to make some people upset being a vigilante, but he's trying to earn that trust of the local police department, and of course he's trying to earn the trust of Gotham. So it's a nice progression. Now, I won't tell you how the film ends, of course, but it's kind of cool to see moments and glimmers of hope in the eyes of those who look up to Batman, so he goes from an intimidating, scary figure to someone who is pretty much the shining light in Gotham City. And the screenplay itself was a little bit snappier than I expected as well, with each story beat pretty meaningful and impactful. Heck, even the crime boss stuff was really cool. Seeing Colin Farrell and John Turturro in these roles, it made for a fun time, but it never felt too hokey, or it never really felt like they weren't giving enough attention to this part of the story. There was enough detail here that actually connected everything pretty nicely by the end. And I even love that they found time to include some social commentary with Catwoman as well. Alrighty, y'all, so we're almost to the cast itself, but one more technical note here. We gotta talk about Michael Giacchino's score. It's on another level, and it is incredible. I have not stopped listening to the score since it was released on Apple Music, but from top to bottom, it is perfect. I literally cannot find one flaw with this score. Batman's theme is chilling and menacing, and there's a little bit of hope as well. And then you have Catwoman's theme, which is elegant but fierce, with enough attitude to match the character. And I know this is probably going to be an unpopular opinion, but in terms of replay value, I can listen to Catwoman's theme much more than Batman's. And I love that Michael Giacchino made Riddler's theme a little bit unpredictable in nature and even scary at times, which does match those horror vibes we get from the Riddler throughout the movie. And Michael Giacchino's score is prominent enough without taking away what we're seeing on screen, and one of the best examples there is in one of my favorite action sequences, the highway chase between the Penguin and Batman. It was chilling in a good way. It sent chills down my spine when we first see the Batmobile, when we first see all the explosions on the highway. And yes, we saw some of that in the trailer, but when you see it all unfold in context of the story, it's just out of this world. But the score here helps this film feel whole. Okay, y'all, so now we're getting into the cast itself, a moment I'm sure you've been waiting for in this review, and we're gonna start with our boy, Robert Pattinson as Bruce Wayne and Batman. Now, I'm gonna start with a statement that might make people mad, but this to me is my favorite Batman that we've ever gotten on the big screen. We spend about 90% of the movie, guys, with Batman versus Bruce Wayne, which gets a little bit of screen time here, but because I think this is more so about the Batman himself and not really too much about Bruce Wayne, we get him in the suit for the majority of the film. So I can't really judge Robert Pattinson's performance as Bruce Wayne too much because he does a great job as the Batman, and I loved his voice. It's gravelly, but it's really understandable, and I thought that it was a little bit more different than the previous Batman voices. But as Bruce Wayne, it's tough to really judge completely, but what I will say is when we do get him in the few scenes we do, I thought he did a really good job at bringing a more dark, gothic, like angsty approach compared to some of the other Bruce Waynes. Like the previous Bruce Waynes we've seen confident, Keaton was confident, Christian Bale was incredibly confident, even Ben Affleck, my gosh, what did he say at one point, that his superpower is money? And Bruce Wayne here doesn't care how rich he is, he knows how rich he is, but he's just so upset because he understands that Gotham City is crumbling, he doesn't know what happened to his parents, and he's just really living in this role as being vengeance, and he has to try to mature out of that stage because vengeance isn't going to save Gotham. But even with Robert Pattinson as the Batman, there are a lot of nuances in his acting. There's also a sort of anger that I don't know if I've seen before in a Batman movie. He's just so upset, and it's kind of cool that the surrounding characters help him break out of that shell. I'm not going to tell you how that happens, but it is just amazing to see that he has eventually learned to control this anger, but it is really cool to see the progression of his character over time. Let's talk about Zoe Kravitz, because to me, she stole every single scene that she was in. Her performance was the most personable and natural in this film. She was just incredible as Catwoman, and I think for me, she is probably my favorite Catwoman that we've ever gotten in movies. Yes, Michelle Pfeiffer is great, Halle Berry is amazing as Catwoman, but here she was just so convincing. Zoe Kravitz's motivations were felt throughout the story to me, but she was able to just go ahead and flesh out her character, and the movie itself was able to allow me to empathize with Catwoman. And honestly, the way she was fighting and the way they framed Zoe Kravitz here was so cool, but Zoe's fighting style wasn't just brute strength, she was floating in and out of hand-to-hand combat sequences, using her environment to her advantage, and she's a boss. Like seriously, the first moment she comes on screen, she just commands your attention, and Zoe Kravitz here honestly delivers one of the best performances in the movie. Her and Robert Pattinson's chemistry, it was palpable. You could feel the romance coming off the screen. And okay, sue me if I'm still shipping them after the movie. they're just so amazing together. So I can't wait to rewatch this and maybe even take away more moments that are subtle but incredibly loud in context. And the next standout here is Paul Dano as the Riddler. Y'all, he is the right amount of crazy for this role, because there are some moments of dialogue and the way he even delivers lines that took my breath away, but not in like a very romantic way. It was incredibly scary at times. He's terrifying, his heavy breathing through that mask and everything that he has done throughout the film and the way he's killed people. Yeah, it's kind of haunting, honestly. And even though we do get a lot of his acting via news segments and social media videos, I think that it just goes to show you how great Paul Dano is, because some of the most compelling moments happen when he's not even technically in frame with Batman or anyone else. He's just off camera in a video. You can just tell that Paul Dano really just sunk himself into this role. It must have been hard for him to sleep at night, because some of the things his character has to do here and the way he's acted as the Riddler, man, it's just incredibly compelling. And y'all, the way that the Riddler made me feel stupid was hilarious, because some of these riddles and the way he was building up to that final act and the big reveal, it took me off guard, because I thought to myself, how the heck did I not see that coming? But all jokes aside, let's get into one of the final standouts that I do want to talk about here, and that's Colin Farrell as the Penguin, or Oswald Cobblepot as he likes to be called, because he hates the name the Penguin here, which is a very interesting note. But Colin Farrell, we know him. He's a legendary actor. To me, he's one of the best working in Hollywood today, but you couldn't even tell it was him if no one told you, because of the prosthetic and makeup work being excellent here. I mean, honestly, the costuming in general was great, but I loved the prosthetic work and the makeup for the Penguin, and he was a great source of comic relief as well. One of the funniest moments here is him schooling Batman and Jim Gordon on their Spanish. So it was just really cool to see how Colin Farrell was able to go from kind of like a crazy mob boss to someone who eventually knows his worth in Gotham. So it's a cool character arc, and I'm sure we're gonna see more of him in the sequel. Okay, maybe I lied. There's a couple more performances I do want to touch on briefly, and I say briefly because we don't get them too much on screen, but I have a feeling we will get at least this performance more often, and that is Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon. He's no nonsense, he doesn't take any crap from the Batman, and honestly, he is grounded, but he's one of the only characters that the Batman trusts, and I feel like that dynamic was incredibly unique because it's so different from Catwoman and Batman's chemistry. They have a working relationship, but you can see it slowly start to evolve, and Jim Gordon is writing for the Batman here, and I love seeing them on site during these murder scenes where he's able to go ahead and like kind of solve the riddles and gather some clues with the Batman. So Jeffrey Wright here was just so solid. And lastly, John Turturro as Carmine Falcone was subtle but effective. Can't lie to you guys, I don't remember the last time I actually really liked seeing Carmine Falcone in Batman movies, TV shows, anything like that, but here, John Turturro does a really good job. It's probably going to be one performance that a lot of people overlook, but on rewatches, grow to appreciate, because John Turturro he's excellent in his craft. But I do love the fact that every time he's on screen, you're always like, what's he gonna say? So John Turturro deserves major props for his performance as Falcone. Okay guys, so the last section before we get into my overall thoughts on the film, and we're talking action. It's all very well orchestrated, it's incredibly well directed, and I could actually track the action much better than some of the other Batman movies. And when the scale gets huge, especially in that third act in the stadium sequence, it is just unreal. Like, I literally don't know if I blinked one time. There's just so much going on, and there's little things happening in the background too that just help add to every single action set piece. I mean, there's a lot of my favorite moments here, whether it be the highway sequence, the initial fight with the goons on the train, and even just seeing Batman just try to navigate his way through a fight is cool, because sometimes he gets knocked on his butt, and that's different. He's not invincible. So overall, you guys, the Batman exceeded my expectations, and to me, this is Matt Reeves' masterpiece. It's the best work that he's ever turned in, and I am in the camp that Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is much better than War for the Planet of the Apes, and this is much more on the level of quality of Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, but it's even better than that film. It's incredibly memorable. All the performances just work in harmony with one another. The score, the cinematography, the writing, all the technical aspects just work. I was completely locked in from start to finish, even though there were some issues with weak pacing in the middle of the movie, and I do wish that maybe we would have gotten more moments with some integral characters to Batman's story. I think that a lot of that will be solved in the sequel. When you think about it, this movie really only took place within no more than a week, so there was a lot to unpack here that Matt Reeves had to really juggle, and I love the fact that we got a very compelling villain in the Riddler. We were able to see the crime underworld side of Gotham City in a new light, or in a new bit of darkness, because this movie is dark, y'all. But we were able to just get a lot of different unique angles to a Batman story that honestly we've probably seen at least a little bit of in other movies, but Matt Reeves took some of those elements and made his own story. Year 2 Batman, I never expected to love it so much, but I just love this version of the Batman. This kind of superhero movie is just something you don't see every day, and I'm just so glad it exists. It's going to be out in the world for everyone to see, and y'all, I'm just excited for you to see and witness what I do think is arguably one of the best superhero movies of all time. So there you have it, you guys. That's my real review of the Batman. Again, this was all spoiler free, but if y'all want to talk spoilers in the comments, let's go ahead and tag it and talk about it down below. And y'all gotta let me know, do you agree with me? Do you think this is also a perfect Batman movie? Are you in the middle, or did you not like this film? Because if you didn't like it, that's okay. We can talk about that too. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the big red button below. Subscribe to the channel, tap on that bell, and hit the thumbs up button again if you are a fan of the Batman. I mean, gosh, there's so much more to talk about, but when you see this movie, I can't wait to have those discussions. I need a drink of water. I'm getting kind of hot. You know, this movie, so darn good. Alrighty, y'all. Again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you at the next screening.